Hey, me again. December 8th, 2022. And some people have asked me my own thoughts about what's happening overseas. My answer to that is it's going to be worse before it gets better. Russia can't save face without continuing the war, whether people like to admit to it or not. Putin's on a ticking time clock here. Whether or not he can accomplish what he needs to accomplish before he gets a bullet in the brain pan or simply thrown out, or yeah, there are rumors that he's sick now, so who knows? Maybe he'll catch something and die that way. But either way, he's not going to stay in office forever. And his successor, whoever that may be, will have to clean up his mess one way or the other. As for the Ukrainians, well, they surprised me, that's for sure. They've definitely done more than a lot of people would have thought possible with the resources that they have available. But they're in it for the long term because they have to be, because they know what the stakes are. Their country is at stake, and they're not going to be pulling out anytime soon. Whether or not they'll be able to do anything more, only time will tell. At the end of the day, they're taking casualties, same as the Russians are. It's just a matter of how many bodies have to be piled before they get what they need, or before Russia just gives up. If Russia gives up. After all, Ukraine hasn't done a very good job of taking advantage of the Russian screw-ups to the point where they could isolate entire army groups, like what Finland did during the Winter War. I can't imagine it's because it's an easy thing to do. I mean, people looking back, military operations don't just happen. At the end of the day, there's a lot of preparation that has to happen before anything gets done. And to the poor bastard who's stuck there in the front lines, there isn't really much he can do until he's told to do something, whether he wants to or not. That's just the nature of the beast. At the end of the day, it's still a defensive war just as much as it is an offensive one. And whether or not Ukraine will pull through, again, only time will tell. Whether or not Russia will eventually falter to the point where they have no choice but to pull back, only time will tell. Another hotbed of contention is Taiwan right now. Number one microchip exporter in the world. The United States trying to play hardball with China. I don't know if that's going to do any good. China is not a paper dragon. Now, their military record isn't very good, but I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that border skirmishes and proxy wars are easier to manage than a full-blown war. And Taiwan, despite what they think will be a full-blown war, in my opinion, just because they've made too many enemies. Being the big bully on the block doesn't do you a whole lot of good when other nations are sitting there going, we really don't need you. And if you think the sanctions against Russia are bad, the harsh reality is what the world could do to China would probably cripple it beyond its own capacity to actually do anything about. Isolating China is a good idea only if China is willing to basically play ball as a result of the threat. The problem is China has no problem calling the bluff, even if it comes at the cost of its own citizens, unlike Russia, who's trying to find ways around their economic problems. Another issue that comes into play with this is China has a really bad habit of going, if I can't have it, neither can you. And worst case scenario, I'm pretty sure they have enough surface to ground missiles that even with all the new technology Taiwan has, it'll be just that. If they decide to cut and run, China will cut and run in a very devastating way. Now, I don't know what this is going to cause, what that would cause in terms of civilian casualties and various other collateral damage. But at the end of the day, if they hit those microchip factories, it really doesn't matter. And for those people who go, well, they wouldn't do that. Really? Think about it. If they can't have Taiwan diplomatically, and it looks like they won't, they'll have to go in conventionally. Now, China is more than capable of doing this given enough time. At the end of the day, though, the whole world's going to see it coming, so it's just a matter of who will be able to respond to Taiwan's defense. as well as the Taiwanese themselves. They're going to be just like Ukraine, if not worse, because you're dealing with an island. They know they've got nowhere to go. And with that in mind, they've been preparing for a hell of a lot longer than the Ukrainians have. As a result, I don't really see a war between Taiwan and China being any less than Armageddon-style bloody. And again, if China decides to take their ball and leave, well, they can accomplish a lot with a lot of the missiles that they have at their disposal. Now, I don't have the numbers on hand, but again, you don't need a lot. You just need enough to make it through their average defense grid and hit those microchip factories. Simply because that's all it would take. By devastating Taiwan's ability to export microchips, the strategic value of the island, it doesn't drop to zero, but now it becomes questionable whether it's even worth looking to defend. And I know that sounds cynical, but at the end of the day, that's what a lot of other nations are going to be looking at. Does Taiwan have anything worth holding? If that answer is no, then the question is, why should our boys bleed for Taiwan? It's the same with Ukraine. There's no way in hell Western nations are going to bleed for Ukraine or Taiwan unless either country had something that they need. And unlike Ukraine, Taiwan does. I'm not going to say Ukraine doesn't have things. It does. Fertilizer, oil production capacity, industrial capacity, and of course agriculture product. They are one of the largest exporters of grain, cereals in the world. So you can't say that they're not important, but they're not important enough to become directly involved and basically say screw it and go into a World War III. In which case, well, if that actually did happen, and obviously it didn't, but if it does happen, you're looking at stacking a lot of bodies again. It's not a pleasant picture, but that's the reality of war. People die. China engaging in Taiwan will be no different. The only thing that will be different is how, why, and the timeline. And that's something no one really knows. China has been postponing the invasion of Taiwan for so long that it's almost laughable to think that they would even try. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter what their military wants. What matters is what the Politburo wants. Now, luckily, they have a lot of issues of their own right now. There's a lot of demonstrations, protests, a lot of brave individuals going, you know what, we don't care if there's another Tiananmen Square, let's fucking raise some shit. And as a result, China's going to have to deal with its internal issues long before it deals with Taiwan directly, which it still classes as an internal issue. Again, China is or can be an economic powerhouse. If it had Taiwan, it'd be even bigger. The hard reality, though, is that it's an export market almost exclusively, and its own people have suffered great wealth but also great poverty as a result. Their human rights violations even outdoes Canada's police state process that we're currently in right now. And despite what a lot of people like to think, no country is an angel, but at the same time, China is looking out for itself here. And the question is whether the self-interest of other nations will override China's capacity to negotiate, or China will just break the bat and say, screw it and let's get it on. Again, only time will tell. I honestly don't know. I think it would be nasty either way. In my opinion, there are more pressing issues at play rather than that. And what I mean by that is you have volcanoes erupting and you have basically climate is changing. Has been for a very long time, but thanks to, again, the volcanoes and various other processes, we're going to need to adapt to the new realities, whether we want to or not. It's probably the only thing that tree huggers got right. In terms of the overall aspects of world affairs, I'm not a globalist, but if globalism is to work, it's an all or nothing deal. One person doing something will accomplish very little. 68 billion people doing something will accomplish a whole hell of a lot. And that requires more than just a national will or a government who doesn't seem to understand that by reducing your food output and starving your citizens and closing down farms like they're doing in the Netherlands and eventually here, that basically all that you're doing is you're one step closer to another revolution. And as Sean Connery said in Hunt for the Red October, a revolution every now and again might not be a bad thing. After all, the Dutch practically, I think they did invent the quote that says, "Eat the rich." I got no idea what the hell they're trying to do, but it's a dumb thing to do. The European Union should know better. They can barely provide enough power and natural gas for their own usages due to the fact that they keep hamstringing themselves. Now they want to starve themselves too? Ugh, I don't get it. And with that kind of mentality happening here with our own stupid politicians, eat the rich doesn't sound like a bad idea sometimes. Anyway, that's just my ramblings. Have a good one.